Hello and welcome to a new episode of FEPS Talks, the podcast of the Foundation of European Progressive Studies. My name is Christian Salm. I'm the head of Democracy and Participation Programs, and it's my pleasure to host this episode. This episode deals with an event that many people around the world are following at the moment. I guess you know what I'm talking about. It's the FIFA World Cup in the US, Canada, and Mexico. But we're not going to discuss the quality of the matches or that Lionel Messi now is the top scorer of World Cups. We're discussing the political dimension of the World Cup and the political dimension around this major sport event. And it's a pleasure that we will do this together with Cas Mudde. Cas is a political scientist and he is from the Netherlands, but he is located in the US, where he is a research professor for international affairs at University of Georgia. So he is the perfect person to go through the political issues around the World Cup. Cas has many research interests. It's political parties, it's extremism, it's European politics and international affairs. And then, of course, there is one more, but this is maybe more a passion than a research interest, and this is football. So, Cas, what do you think now within 1 week into the World Cup? There were many observers assuming that this might become the most political World Cup of all times. What is your take on this?
Yeah, I must admit that the start is less politicized than I had expected. I think many others had expected. And that is in itself also really interesting because you have the biggest show in the world in the US. You have a president who is obsessed with shows and being at the center of them. And he has largely ignored it because he is organizing his own like MMA fights in the lawn of the White House, which shows you, first of all, still how secondary the status of football, soccer is in the US, particularly within right-wing circles. Right? I mean, I don't think there's any other president in the world that would have pretty much ignored a World Cup in their country. But he's completely obsessed with his own thing. But the other thing is that it's true, it's not so political as expected because Trump himself hasn't spoken out. But the World Cup is still fully shaped by mega politics in a way that I don't think previous World Cups have been. One example, of course, the Somali referee who wasn't allowed into the country, the Iranian team, which cannot sleep on US soil and has to go almost directly after the game on a plane, which will affect how they can play because it's really bad for the rest. There was a news item that the whole Uruguayan team was pulled over for an immigration stop. Right now, on any normal day, these would be major scandals. But because we live in Trump's world, where every day we have the craziest type of scandal, these are now just minor scandals. And it is, I mean, to me, pretty upsetting to see how most of the coverage of the World Cup is now fully just about soccer and how great Messi is and whatever. And these levels of human rights abuse, of authoritarianism, are just considered sideshows. And in that sense, I get this Qatar vibe again, where you had like a lot of stories before the first ball was kicked. And as soon as the first ball was kicked, everything went back to normal.
Okay, this takes us directly to maybe one of the core questions of the connection of sports and politics. So when we have such kind of major sport events, there is always ahead, especially if it's in countries with, let's say, a human rights track record that is rather poor, demands for a boycott. And there was also a demand from a couple of MEPs, members of the European Parliament, to UEFA to think about measures to boycott the World Cup in the US, Canada, and Mexico. Why do you think that when it then comes to the major sport events, there is usually no boycott? And then the major political issues somehow disappear in the background.
Yeah, I mean, it's a collective action problem in most of the cases. No one wants to be the one that doesn't go, and while the tournament still continues. Boycotts are very uncommon at the World Cup. They used to be very more common in the Olympics, but that was at the height of the Cold War. And then you also had kind of hegemons like the US who would lean very heavily on other NATO countries to boycott, and the Soviets who would pretty much tell like their satellite states to boycott. Um, I'm also a little bit, I boycotted myself as I did Qatar, but at the same time, I'm a little bit mixed on what the national associations can do, or what UEFA, but particularly what FIFA can do, because we also have to keep in mind that FIFA is like the General Assembly of the UN. It represents all of the countries, all of the national soccer associations, and the majority of them are not democratic, just as the General Assembly of the UN. So to expect that the democratic outcome of a vote or of the preferences of a majority of authoritarian regimes will be democratic is fairly naive, right? And so I think we either can have a liberal democratic cup, which won't be a World Cup because it will only represent a minority of countries, or we will have an actual World Cup and it will never be like in line with liberal democracy or human rights, because the vast majority of countries don't do that. And if you want to organize a World Cup only in countries that abide by the rules and that have the infrastructure to organize it, then we will have the World Cup pretty much always in England or Germany. And so what kind of a World Cup is that?
We have seen the German Chancellor giving a shirt of the German national team to Donald Trump during the G7 summit this week. When you think of boycott measures, I mean, what would you recommend to European politicians and members of the European Parliament? Should they go to the US and watch the games, or should they better stay away from the World Cup?
I think even if Trump is at the moment not interested in the World Cup, the World Cup is always the organization's countries kind of way to shine, and they will always politicize it. And so I think you want to support your team, right? But at the same time, you kind of represent a regime. I don't know. I find again, I'm a little bit mixed on that. I think rather than boycotting the World Cup, I think you should actually boycott July 4th and the 250th anniversary celebrations, which are even more like a Trump thing. But I think the boycott should come from us, from the viewers, because we make the World Cup. Like Gianni Infantino needs money. That is what gets him reelected, to be able to redistribute money. The money comes from us. If we don't watch, then Coca-Cola doesn't pay tens of millions of dollars to be able to sponsor. But there's no more fickle and opportunistic person than a sports fan. And so the same people who are outraged all the time about like whatever the southern border or the racism of Trump will now happily watch the tournament.
You're saying that Infantino needs money, and indeed there were lots of discussions about the skyrocketing ticket prices. It's not only this World Cup; it was also at World Cups before that the ticket prices were very high. So are the World Cups now only about money and not about the game? What do you think about that?
I mean, international football is increasingly only about the money, and that's not just FIFA. The Champions League is only about the money. The ticket prices are insane most of the time. The Premier League is all about the money. Similarly for the ticket prices, so there's nothing new there. I think what is much more interesting is not so much the even further commercialization; it's the Americanization of the World Cup, because a lot of things that are happening because they're held in the US. And in the US, we have so first of all, sports games in general are insanely expensive in the US. And so it's very common to pay more than $100 to just go to an average game. And you don't have any good seat. I mean, I at times look for tickets and I have to pay more than $100 to sit in the nosebleeds for an average hockey game. So a ticket of $200-300 is absolutely normal for an important game. They pay much more here. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that scalping, the resale of tickets, is legal in the US. And so that creates this market, because most of the tickets that were sold are bought by people who are not going to the game. They're going to try and resell it, which again, it's legal here. The third part is dynamic pricing, right? And dynamic pricing allegedly comes from Disney and has been introduced in Europe already. Ryanair does it, and increasingly in the UK, train companies do it. But here in the US, again, it's very normal. And all of these things drive up the prices, but at the same time, they're innovations for the rest of the world, but they're actually common here in the US, which is why in the US there's less of an outcry about the hiking of prices. Because if you want to go to the Super Bowl, you expect to pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars, if not thousands. Even if you go to a playoff game of my college football team, you're going to pay hundreds of dollars.
Maybe let's go again to the kind of geopolitical issues related to the World Cup. And in the beginning, you were mentioning that the Iran team can only enter the US when they have a game. Do you think that let's assume that the Iran conflict would escalate, or now as it looks that there might be a kind of last-minute peace deal? Could the World Cup become a kind of symbolic stage for either reconciliation or a renewed geopolitical confrontation?
I think in general, football much more reflects society than that it shapes it. And the only thing that it does is it brings an intensity to relationships, positive or negative, that goes beyond what pretty much anything else can do, because there are just a lot of people who get very emotional about football, right? And so if the US and Iran would play each other, then at that day and around that day, the relations will be very intense, whether they are positive or negative. And after that, it will just go back to whatever it was. And so both Sepp Blatter and now Gianni Infantino like to pretend that soccer brings world peace, but soccer brings neither peace nor war. It can facilitate initiatives, but it cannot change society.
And should this game between the Iran and the US really should take place, what do you think would that be the geopolitical derby of all times? Or are there any other important games from the past that come to my mind that might have a similar taste and touch?
Yeah, so US and Iran played each other in 2022. That was a big thing. The US Soccer Association, for some reason, posted a picture of the Iranian flag without the symbol of the Islamic Republic in it, which led to a backlash. We've of course had the famous game of Argentina against England with Maradona's wonderful goals, both the handball and particularly the solo. which was kind of in the wake of the Maldivas war and sort of massive tension around that. I'm not sure whether this will be the most geopolitical game ever, but it is, I'm not sure, unprecedented, but it must be extremely rare that we have a World Cup which is hosted by a country that is at war with another country, and that country that they're at war with is actually playing at the World Cup. I mean, it's surreal in many ways.
Yeah, well, that's the case indeed. And in the beginning of the World Cup now, it seems that those political issues and topics are, yeah, less important than that many expected. But still, what do you think? I mean, in the past, we had the Olympic Games in Nazi Germany. We had the Olympic Games in China in 2008, and you already mentioned the World Cup in Qatar in 2022. And they have been called to risk legitimizing controversial policies of the hosting countries. Um, do you think there is still a risk in this World Cup that it might be used to legitimize controversial political issues?
But there is an obsession in the public debate and partly in the academic debate about something that's usually called sports washing, as the use of sports to whitewash a poor reputation, right? And this became kind of the term to speak about the Qatar World Cup. But it's, while it exists, it actually is often applied only to global South countries, whereas it's not only used by them. And so Qatar is a good example. Qatar didn't sports wash because Qatar didn't have a reputation to launder. It actually organized the World Cup to get a reputation. Similarly, Saudi Arabia doesn't sports wash because it doesn't have to. Like MBS doesn't care at all what other people think about him because everyone will come to him anyway. Um, and the two countries that in the literature are generally seen to have used the World Cup to sports wash was post-apartheid South Africa, which used the World Cup to show that they were no longer evil and to show that they were an African country. And interestingly, Germany in 2006, which used the World Cup to kind of alleviate a lot of the fears about a reunited Germany. Now, the US is even stranger. First of all, we would never have gotten something like the Nazi Olympics or Beijing because the Trump regime is not a fascist regime. It doesn't have the level of organization or of ideology. And so the Trump regime or administration, it's not even a regime, hasn't taken control of the World Cup. He at times comes in and out, but overall the organization is an independent organization. Of course, Trump himself is not particularly interested. On top of that, Trump has nothing to launder. Trump doesn't think that his policies are problematic. In fact, he boasts about his racism. He boasts about his authoritarianism. Right? So I do think that this might still be a tournament and one of the few tournaments that will leave the hosting country with a worse reputation than before. And look, Trump is going to come into this event at a certain point in time. No one knows when, no one knows what he's going to do, but he's going to be there. And he's undoubtedly going to do things that upset a lot of people. The tournament itself, while having started better than I had expected, right, will have a lot of games that are not sold out. It's very long. There are going to be weather issues. So there's a fair chance that as a tournament, it also gets a poor reputation, which Qatar had a very smooth tournament. And in the end, for seems not just soccer fans, but also for most of the media, as long as that ball rolls and everything goes well, people are happy and don't care anymore about human rights abuses or other things.
Okay, so you do expect that Trump at one point will use the World Cup as a political tool in his own interests. But what would you think will happen if he should wear a shirt of the American team? What would be the effect of that? Would it kind of create a disunity or maybe even unity in the US? Or is the status of football in the US not that high that it would not matter at all?
I would love to see that, but I don't think it will happen because Trump hates one thing more than anything else, and that's being associated with losers. And the US men's national team might have beaten Paraguay, but is not going to win the tournament. And so he will not take that risk. But if he would do it, it would create a massive kind of internal conflict for many soccer fans because soccer in the US is associated with Hispanic populations, generally immigrants from particularly the global south, and then kind of the upper middle class of white suburbia, which is kind of the democratic part. And there is already a little bit of discomfort among the more politically aware US fans because the captain of the team, Pulisic, is broadly seen as a Trump supporter, as are some other people on the team. Whereas, of course, here in the US, soccer is women, right? And the women national soccer team has always been the more prominent one. And that team has always been very progressive and outspoken on that. So that tension is already there. If Trump would actually capture it, let alone if people from the team would be on pictures with him or speak out for him, which Trump could kind of force them to do. I think that would create divisions. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's see if he will dare to do so or not. Let's maybe also address quickly democracy in the US related to the World Cup. What is here your take? Should the World Cup also be used from external actors to show and demonstrate that there is dismantling of democracy in the US?
Hey, with a country like the US, you don't need that. Like every newspaper already has people here, and they should have written these stories a long time ago. And to be fair, most European media do that. It's much more the US media which is the problem, which sane washes everything and whitewashes everything. Sure, you can highlight it, but personally, I don't even think it's particularly relevant because it's not so visible. Like there are virtually no protests, and ICE at the moment hasn't operated. So most of this human right abuse is not directly related to the World Cup, but it has been in full view for 1.5 years. So no, I don't think so. That is much more the case for countries like Qatar, like where you have to have kind of a justification to write about it. But the US is the biggest country. You write about anything that happens here. So this is what I dislike with some journalists say, well, we have to go there to highlight what goes wrong. I mean, that's bullshit. You're here already the whole time. You have written those stories, or you should have written those stories before.
But wouldn't then there be a more important role of the football organizations to play here? To a certain extent, FIFA. But what about UEFA? Wouldn't they have to defend human rights and democratic principles when it comes to such a major sport event in a country where we have those issues?
It's a bit naive to expect it from UEFA because like there have been Champions League or European finals being played in Budapest under Orban. Clearly, UEFA, while at times pretending to be the pure one vis-a-vis FIFA, it's a bit like the EU. I mean, the EU also loves to highlight like how progressive they are and criticize elements of authoritarianism and nativism in the US very cautiously. But at the same time, in the US, an almost more brutal regime at the Mediterranean, where more people die than at the southern border in the US. So I think honestly, we live in a period where for some reason we still think that the political elites are going to do liberal democratic things and sometimes even progressive things. But the political power is not there. The political power is, first of all, on the right, and largely on the right, which is totally happy to make coalitions with the far right. And if you want to have any example in Europe, you just look at the European People's Party.
Yeah, indeed. So you don't have lots of hopes that UEFA and FIFA will take some political measures, but maybe we can quickly have a look at the FIFA Peace Prize that Trump was given. I mean, do you think Trump should be stripped of that Peace Prize? We can expect FIFA would never do so, but that would be maybe something that could put some attention.
No, actually, I don't think that should be done because that way you make it sound as if it is actually something real. It is not something real. It is, I think the story behind it is misunderstood. And I didn't come up with this myself, but I heard it a couple of months ago. Like people think that Infantino is a mega boy or is just crawling for Trump, but actually this is self-serving. Like FIFA always makes deals with hosting countries, and one of the most important part of that deal is that all of FIFA's earnings are tax-free. And Infantino knows how volatile Trump is and how he loves to renegotiate things. And obviously, this is a deal where FIFA is rolling the US. And so probably Trump doesn't know of that deal. And so he just tries to keep him happy. And if he has to crawl a little bit and create a price to protect 3-4 billion that you would otherwise pay in taxes, and which would mean for him 3-4 billion less to give to national soccer associations, which will re-elect him, he will be happy to do that.
Okay, there would be lots of other very interesting questions to discuss with you, but we're already getting towards the end of our time, and there is one very important last question to ask you. What do you think who will win the World Cup? I mean, I know that you don't follow the games as your personal boycott to the World Cup, but still, that would be an interesting question to get your answer.
Yeah, so I like pretty much everyone else. I thought Spain or France. Spain clearly didn't start out very well, and France didn't have the best campaign before. But the group stage is irrelevant at this stage. I still stick with, maybe because of the first game, I would go for France now because they have so much depth. I don't think England, because they beat a weak Croatia or the Netherlands or even Germany. I hope Germany has a better tournament than they had for a while, but I would still go for France.
Okay, let's see who will gonna make it, and also if some of those political issues related to the World Cup that we discussed may unfold in the next weeks until the end of the World Cup. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, and take care.
Thank you.